Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for This Needs to Be Read, a segment of This Needs to Be Said. One of my favorite parts, I think it's my favorite part, because if you grew up on Reading Rainbow like I did, you know that books take you on adventures. It takes you on journeys. You never have to leave your room, and you have traveled around and explored places that you've never needed to get a passport to. Well, one of the things that has been interesting to me, and I don't know if it's I'm a bit nosy or I want to know if someone else has done this thing or done something like it before I step out into it, but you look at history. I've been looking at personal family history, and we talked in another interview about someone going through their family journey and how I could still connect to that. So while I'm talking, if you can help people connect to history by writing a book, do so, just like the authors of my interview today. The Art of Making History Alive by ALYSON RICHMAN and SHAUNNA J. Edwards, the authors of The Thread Collectors. For me, history has always been a block. It seemed like it was more of a guide topic to be able to grasp a hold of and get the dates right and regurgitate that information for our teachers. But if I could just write about the experience I had in learning about a place or visiting a place, I think I would have done better on tests. No one listened to me and changed those tests when I was in school, but it didn't keep me from still gaining knowledge of history. So I want to welcome these two ladies into the conversation with us, and I want to talk about them putting together a book and what they hope that the reader would gain from taking a trip through history. So hello, ALYSON, and hello, SHAUNNA, and I hope I said everyone's name correctly. Welcome to This Needs to Be Read.
Thank you for having us,
Catherine.
Thank you.
So one of my things growing up was I couldn't grasp history. Another thing I didn't say during this interview, but I've said to my audience before, I always thought history was something that happened without me being present. I thought it was always going to be something, in the past, nothing I could know about. I didn't know history could happen during my lifetime. And recently I joined a community board from the neighborhood I grew up in. My whole life up until adulthood, I grew up in this one community. And so it makes you care about a place, whether you're still living there or not, I think. And realizing that the space I lived in was living history, right? The streets that I was walking on had stories before my family could move into that community. So I'm going to shut up talking about me because I want to get into what is your collective work, you and ALYSON and SHAUNNA, what your purpose was, your goal was with the Art of Making History Alive.
Well, Catherine, that is so beautiful. And with our novel, The Thread Collectors, ALYSON and I were both inspired by our own personal family histories. What you said about history resonated with me. I majored in literature in college because I didn't think that I could learn enough dates either. I thought that was for the jocks. But now I realize that history is just individual stories stitched together. So in The Thread Collectors, you're going to meet this woman named Stella. She's named after my mother, who is named after one of her female ancestors. And she's in New Orleans, my hometown, and it's in the Civil War. She's an enslaved woman, but at the same time, she's still thinking about what she can do to help the cause. And what she does to help the cause is she takes her needle and thread and she actually embroiders maps to help enslaved men escape to join the Union Army. She's got this beloved William on the field. He's fighting. We illuminate some of those amazing battles where black Union soldiers fought that maybe are not at the forefront of what people understand, but they fought for us. Their sacrifice definitely illuminates our day-to-day. And then, ALYSON, I'll toss it over to you so you can talk about some of the history that you wanted to bring forward from your family.
Yeah, ever since I was a child, my grandmother told me that we had relatives in the South that we had no connection with anymore, that when her ancestors came over, they were German Jews that came over in the 1850s to America to flee, religious persecution that they were experiencing in Europe. There was two brothers, Jacob and Abraham Kling. One brother stayed in New York and worked there, eventually enlisting as a musician in the 31st Regiment of New York in the Union Army. Well, years earlier, when his brother had gone down to Mississippi to expand his business down there, he had enlisted at the time of the Civil War in the 29th Regiment of Mississippi. And so brother against brother during the Civil War happened. And as it was explained to me by my grandmother, that this sort of divide within the family that happened during the Civil War, when one brother chose to fight on the Southern Confederate side and the other on the North for freedom, and again, slavery basically permanently divided the family forever. And that she said, we have no contact anymore with the southern part of the family. And it wasn't really recently until 2019, when my brother started doing some research on Ancestry.com, that he was able to find some of the, offshoots of the Southern family, and someone actually had posted a picture of the family homestead down in Satartia, Mississippi. So I could see a photograph of where Abraham Kling went in the 1860s and set up his shop and everything. And so I was always sort of fascinated by this fact that, two immigrant brothers coming to New York could have such two different views on something as horrific as slavery and fight on opposite sides. And I always thought it would be interesting to explore that familial divide in a novel. This is my 8th novel. It's not my first. It's my first working with the wonderful SHAUNNA Edwards. But it was something that I wanted to bring to the table and to explore within, the context of our novel.
I'm sitting here listening to the both of you, and I'm wondering, of all the times we've complained as a people collective, and I'm putting all of us isms and nice people together, what if our complaint about not having a complete history book comes from nonfiction historical history, like what you all have written, and even some other authors have done? They went and, the research I don't have the strength to do, but they went and found that information to give us these stories we would not have heard of in a school textbook. What if these stories that you all have written become the textbooks that our students read, and that's what they follow, because it comes from, how you all explored these truths and how it came together, and I probably would have read them. And maybe there were historical fictions when I was younger, but I'm wondering, I'm just thinking, what if this is our new history book, what y'all are doing?
I mean, that would be wonderful, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
that would be.
That would be amazing. And I have to say, even we did do a significant amount of research for this. I mean, I went to the battlefields of Port Hudson in my home state of Louisiana, and I held letters from the Civil War in my hands. I learned about the free blacks of New Orleans. But at the same time, I had conversations with my mother about some of her female ancestors that inspire the black women in this book. And we had conversations that I don't know that she always would have been comfortable talking about. I think in particular, in the black community, we don't share enough of our stories. We don't share our oral history. Like, we've passed down the quilts, but maybe not enough of the stories. So anything that gets anyone to think about what has come before and how they can use that knowledge to, brighten the future, I am all for. And then there's one other thing that I think is important about historical fiction. You can use it to confront really sometimes brutal and horrific realities that are still taking place today, but you can have a conversation about it in a way where the other person doesn't feel attacked. We started writing this book, even though we conceived of it back in 2017 is when we first started brainstorming. We started writing about it in 2020 against the backdrop of, the murder of George Floyd, and being able to have conversations about race, but have them in the context of the Civil War, honest conversations of a black woman and a white woman, and then think about what that meant for today, was really illuminating.
I'm just, and let me apologize. I didn't mean to imply that there was more research done on the other thing, because getting your mother to talk in the black community, I can attest to that. My mother made up so many stories. My mother made up stories, and my husband's mom kept everything a secret. So you being able to crack that's a whole other kind of research, to be able to get something that what you said I like, because I'm over here writing things down. What has come before that we can use and learn from. Very rarely do I get that. I mean, maybe a recipe, I cook something similar to the way my mom or my grandma did. But it's basically because I think this is what they did and it sort of tastes like what they made, but not because they gave me the secret, you know. And then you mentioned quilts. I never understood quilts. And I now remember the last quilt I saw, I may have been 5 years old. So that in itself is a powerful message, that we're not making those quilts. We're not piecing together that history. So I hope that your book and other books like it would cause us to go back to doing things that pass it down. If we're not going to talk about it, pass it down. And you know, someone will know that symbol. They will be able to communicate and say, hey, that quilt displayed, because my grandma had one. It felt like very heavy. I remember laying up under it, and it felt like you just put it on top of me, and I'm pinned to the bed. But you stayed warm, and it was squares, maybe 3 4x4 squares sewn together. Looked like scrap material. That's what I thought it was made from. They had old material and just made a quilt. But now that you bring that up, making the quilts, the churches having the sewing circles, they all had a purpose. But if no one tells us, and if no one can crack the code like you ladies have, we won't know. So,
and I think one of the really wonderful things about your family's quilts, Shaunna, because we've had so many discussions about them, is like Shaunna has in her possession this quilt that was made from the dresses of her great-grandmother, her grandmother, the field dress of one of her great-grandmothers, correct, Shaunna? Correct me if I'm wrong. And that's you know, it becomes an artifact of family history, but also like sort of a springboard for future storytelling, for someone to say, what is, like someone like me who goes into her home and says, that's a beautiful quilt, and she starts telling and sharing a story of her family history with me, who's a white, you know, Jewish woman. So I'm learning through that family artifact as well. And so I think the essence of what we set out to do with the Thread Collectors was to, you know, show how stories connect us through history and that we can learn from them. And it's not something, a dusty history book, you know, that all of us were tired, you know, reading in a classroom, but it comes alive, and there's a living, beating heart within that's people's stories and what they experienced, and building empathy. And that's what we set out to do, to bridge the divide, not, you know, to inspire as well, to inspire storytelling. So just like you were just telling us this beautiful story about the heavy quilt and remembering the squares, like you're keeping that history alive, and that's so important.
So, and I love it that we had this time together today, and I hope that we have chances to talk with each other. But our time is winding down, and I want you to let the readers in my audience know, where would you like for them to pick up a copy of Thread Collectors?
Well, we would love for you to support your local independent bookstore. It should be available there, and if it's not, you can always ask your independent bookseller to order it. And if you prefer to order online, it is available on all the online platforms as well. So the Thread Collectors, it just came out yesterday, and Shaunna and I couldn't be more excited to have it fall into readers' hands.
Absolutely. And you can also check us out on our social media handles. I'm on Instagram at @Shaunna with 2 N's, J. Edwards.
And I'm at ALYSON, ALYSON Richman, RICHMAN. And we have a website, thethreadcollectors.com, where you can find all of our events listed. So we might be coming to a place near you to talk about the book.
Fantastic. Both of you, congratulations. It's a hard job to put together a book, even if you were making up every word of it. That's what I do know for sure. Thank you for being vulnerable, because whenever you share about your family, it is exposing yourself too. And sometimes stuff that we share may not be favorable, even though all things do work out for our good. It may not be pleasant to tell at first. And so thank you both for being vulnerable. Thank you both for crossing a divide to bring us this information and making history fun and bringing it alive. You definitely have woken up in me more of exploring some reasons why or some things that we do, and to ask better questions. So much success as you get this word out about your book, and continue to be proud of your work. Thank you both, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to This Needs to Be Said. I hope you've gained something from what has been shared. Send me your comments and show ideas through the website at tntbsmedia.com. I'd love to hear from you.